Installment number 4 of our series on Christian nationalism. Let me begin with just a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this opportunity to learn and share ideas, and help us to feel compassion along with understanding as we discuss those people who do not like us, a few who despise us. Thank you. Amen.
Amen.
Wow. Okay. This session we're going to talk about some of the characteristics of folks who ascribe to Christian nationalism, which, as we have reviewed, is really a political movement as opposed to a religious movement. And I've used the analogy before, the sheep in sheep clothing in wolf underneath. And I thought of some other analogies, but I won't use them because they're not. I'm being recorded. But anyway, what we have here is are situations where I believe that. Before a disclaimer, y'all. I am a psychiatrist, and I'm not a psychologist or a social psychologist. So I diagnose and treat mental illnesses. So I do not bring a tremendous amount of expertise to this, but Sarah and I both have been reading a lot, and this is a distillation of what we understand. If you have any questions about psychiatric illness, I'll do my best to answer it in the context maybe of these folks. So the way I put it together is that this phenomenon is a recurring tribalistic reaction to a threat or a change or a challenge in one's society. And I was reading about really the origins of civilization. You know how we began as hunter-gatherers. We later, as we became more successful and survived more successfully, we gathered together into small bands and then villages and so on. Soon there was a division of labor within the village structure. There was the alpha guy who was the chief, and very early on, we don't know exactly when, but there also was the shaman. And the shaman and the chief worked in very close consonance because, of course, the chief was calling the shots, but wanted a consultation from the spiritual guru about planting or about should we raid this village next Sunday, or how does the moon phase have to do with things? So there's always been a relationship between the secular, as it were, the power, as it were, and the religious until our Constitution. Think about it. But over and over, we have cycles of distress and war and conflict. In tribalistic situations, there have been many. There's been a linkage of power to religion. I put it from the time of Constantine, because Constantine did codify Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. And with it came the trappings of power and the safety from persecution. But at the same time, the priests started wearing robes like the togas of the Roman senators and so on and so forth. So there was really a mixing of the two traditions. Afterwards, divine right of kings. Afterward, Pope Urban sending the people off to the Crusades, saying that a very powerful man, saying to the people who were going to soldier for the Jesus, that I will pardon all your sins ahead of time before you undertake the battle of conquest of the infidel. We've got the religious wars in the 17th, 16th, and 17th century, and we have around the same period, Cromwell and the revolution in England, which deposed the king briefly. All this comes from that religion and power base intermingling and contaminating. Part of the cycle is, as I mentioned, the unrest of a period of time in a society. A time for opportunists, always, a time for a charismatic leader. And you can name them. I know more recently Adolf Hitler, who take charge and become the voice and the representative of the aggrieved population. Along with that is a scapegoat. And certainly we know in the 30s, the Jewish people, who only represented 1% of the population, were selected to be persecuted, and 6 million died. You have to have soldiers in the movement, and I don't mean literally soldiers necessarily, although there have been. The people who are the civilians and the followers, and the enthusiastic people who heed the call to be active. So what we have then is a situation that is materially insecure or stagnant in a population. Well, let's go ahead and talk about nowadays. We're talking about a carving out of the middle class. That we probably heard that phrase, that since the 50s and early 60s, there has been a whittling out of the middle class, with increases on both sides of poverty and affluency. And all the people in the middle have unease and unrest. They're not going anywhere, and they fear that their children are not going to go anywhere too. Nowadays we have flux over immigration. We have a fear of, we're being told we're invaded by immigrants. So there is that threat that some people take very seriously. There's an internal threat by wokeness, or whatever that might be, however you want to say it, is competing spiritualities, and just things that are not trivial by any means, but fentanyl deaths really can affect a society and a community, and can be, frankly, it can be capitalized upon. Anyway, so we had those issues. Now, earlier we had a buildup in the 60s and 70s of civil rights, voting rights. We had feminism, remember, and war protests, moral majority. And we had, speaking of assassinations, we had several tragic assassinations in the 60s that added to the disorientation of society. Nowadays we have a movement, Christian nationalism, which is attempting, and rather successfully, to take over various aspects of our society. And if you all remember the Seven Mountain Mandate that has been declared by the Dominionists to be targets, that these areas are controlled by liberal values, liberal power brokers, and they must be conquered. They must be conquered by the soldiers for Christ, so that the government will be a religious, theocratic government. Okay. Let's see. We talked about theologies. We talked about theonomy too, that the Christian nationalists want to have their laws based on the Old Testament primarily, among the 600 or whatever law, not all 600, but picking and choosing. in all this, we have the charismatic leader. I'm not going to mention names. But we do have charismatic leaders. Well, we have other charismatic leaders too. One of which we recently lost. His life was lost. So we have that, and we have the scapegoat. We have the scapegoats. We have several, really. The immigrants, the persons who disagree with the establishment religiously or culturally. So we have all that. And so we have all that going, and we have an accelerator by the pervasive cable, internet penetration, by high technology, and it's insidious but very powerful. We have the algorithms that shape what we watch and what we listen to, and we also have AI, artificial intelligence, which is increasingly significant, and some ways we don't even appreciate at this point, and will be nothing but more pervasive as we go along. The folks of which we're discussing, just as a tendency, tend to be from certain areas of the country, certain demographics, tending to be from small town or rural America, relatively isolated, relatively limited in experiences, and fairly narrow in education. I was born and raised in Mount Carmel, Illinois, and if you all know where that is, it's a slowly dying town on the Wabash River in southeastern Illinois. And we've got a great football team, but other things have changed over the years. And now I think that's a pretty good, it's a microcosm of stagnation socially and all that. That many of the thousands of small towns in America, I forget what the ratio is, but the ratio of small towns to larger towns is huge. And that's why all those states are red when you look at the distribution. These communities are very proud of their past. They are proud of their land, and they're proud of their honor and their pride and their honor. There is an honor code, actually, I wanted to talk about briefly. And that honor code is primarily in the South, but it's elsewhere too. And that is that when one's honor is besmirched or challenged, one must respond aggressively. And if you've heard of the Code of Duello, the dueling code developed in, well, it developed in Europe, but it was brought over particularly in the southern states. To right the wrong of insult. It's part of our Celtic heritage, I think. Folks also have what I call, what has been called, they have a psychological immune system, and I think it's important to talk about this, that for us to feel like integrated, worthy people, we need to have a way of maintaining that. And the things that cause us, the stresses or that cause us not to feel that integrated feeling are very disturbing. And the psychological immune system, the defense mechanisms are in place to keep that intact, okay? And we'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. Now, social psychologists have had a look at patterns or demographics and patterns of attitudes in certain communities. Let us say, and that they have studied trends in folks who are trending toward Christian nationalism or right-wing attitudes in voting. So, this is what, and I'll go through them very quickly here. Generally, the recognized qualities that these folks share, but there are many exceptions, okay? Many exceptions. The first is a desire for cognitive closure. And what that means is, that's a fancy term for we're more interested in answers than questions, and that we'd rather have a literal way to go, to live, to live, rather than be questioned about it. That is, in the religious realm, it might be scriptural literalism that some people believe in. People with cognitive closure needs tend not to be very curious, tend not to want to engage in questions and answers. The second is authoritarian acceptance. And this is an important one. I mean, not quite what you think it might be. It doesn't mean that they are eagerly looking for and awaiting the authoritarian ruler like a Hitler or a Stalin. But what this says is that people with authoritarian acceptance tend to want order and rules. Okay. I'm thinking of a good soldier, a real good soldier, who would be very involved in that, following orders, following rules. If you're an authoritarian ruler, the trains would run on time, which was said about Mussolini, if you remember, back in the day, in the 20s, actually. The third is social dominance orientation. And this is a problematic thing because it accepts the stratification of society. It accepts the stratification racially, it accepts the stratification economically. And it's kind of Calvinistic, and we've talked about Calvin in the past in a way, and the predestination, and God is all powerful and He has laid out for everybody the way things are going to be. So if you're poor, it's been laid out for you, and if you're rich, it's been laid out for you. At time, in a sense, as a special blessing from God, and poverty conversely. The racial division has been obvious since 1619, and we're still in that. We're still, to some great degree, in that morass. Number 4, cultural narcissism. And there are two in my work. I mean, I think about narcissism. There are two different kinds. There's the grandiose narcissist, and there's what I call the upside down narcissist, who has an undercurrent of superiority and grandiosity, but nobody understands them, nobody appreciates them, and so they're kind of the persecuted narcissist. I call it narcissism upside down. So they're not grandiose, they are frequently angry and resentful because people just don't appreciate them. I think there's a lot of encouragement in that these days for certain groups of people to be told that they are being discriminated against. Like white males, discriminated against. And so it just puts it on its head. And it also, I think, leads to sensitivity, touchiness, Like a guy went to the bar and, he looks over and he's, what are you looking at? That type of deal. Well, seriously, it could lead to conflict. And when a group of people endorse this kind of thing, it certainly can. Number 5 is reactance. Reactance is a fancy word, and what it means is that when you tell me to do something, I'll find a way not to do it. And I may be aggressive, or I may be just passive-aggressive. And when you think about the people in our society, back in COVID, when there were mask mandates, or when there were where you could go type of mandates, there was a great deal of resistance from a particular group or demographic. And when Mr. Trump came back from his COVID stay in the hospital, he stood, remember what he did? The first thing he did? He tore off his mask. Right, right. The next thing is moral absolutism. And there's right and wrong.
David, what did you say? I didn't hear that voice.
Reactance. I know, just think of resistance, passive aggressiveness, opposition, oppositionalism, anti-vaxxing, things like that. Moral absolutism means that there is a right and wrong, there's a black and white, and that must be honored and followed. And then the last of these attributes is, and there may be others, but the ones I've read about, the last is external locus of control. Now that's a psychological term, and that's one I kind of use too. And what that means is that emotionally we are at the whim of what is outside of us, that we lack an internal locus of control, which is desirable after all, but we are controlled by outside external events. And it makes for a population that's stirred up because they do not feel that they are in charge and they need to circle the wagons. Wagon circling deal. Along with these traits, there are reinforcing thinking styles. Now this is kind of more my alley because this is cognitive science. This is the idea that we are what we think. We feel from our thoughts, that they come as a derivative of our thoughts. And of course the opposite can occur as well, but classic cognitive therapy seeks to change negative thinking and neutralize it so the feelings will improve. That in a nutshell. However, there's a dark side, and this is the dark side. Now, I'll give you some examples of that. Have you ever told yourself, I knew that was going to happen. I just knew that was going to happen. Confirmation bias, and that happens a lot. That happens in the normal realm of things too. I think that we go, we have an expectation, and then even if it's far-fetched, we seek to find a confirmation of our theory. This occurs with these folks. Overgeneralization, stereotyping, and acceptance of unfiltered propaganda, language, or images. And think about that. And I think I have this thing too. I think some memes are really funny. Okay, and I suppose that's me. That's the blame on me, I guess. But I have a great sense of humor. That's probably don't. But language, propaganda language, can be extreme language. Like I said earlier, our nation is invaded. It's being invaded. That someone said that Portland was a war zone. And if people hear that over and over and over and over, you know, Joseph Goebbels said, if you tell a big lie over and over, you believe it. You begin to believe it. The people believe it. And that's a lot of what's happening nowadays. And it's reinforced on the cable and elsewhere. Here's a good one. And I don't know, it's kind of a paternaity. I know. Basically, though, what that means is that you want to find meaning in whatever's going on. You want to find a pattern. And, you know, it reminds me of a impressionist painting style called pointillism, where, you know, if you're up real close, it's just like a little random dots. But if you step back and observe it, I thought that painting is so stunning that it's a scene in Paris. Anyway, it makes perfect sense, and these people are right there, and the light post is there, and the cobbling is there, but up front you can't see it. But you've got to back up, and you're always going to see the pattern. There's always a pattern. Proportionality issue, proportionality bias is where, and it's a little hard to explain and maybe a little less convincing, but when there's something big going on, people can assume that there has to be something very complex causing it. And that complex issue is not apparent. It might be hidden. We might have to look look closer to find those patterns and all. But this is another pattern of thinking that is employed by folks like this. Another one is teleological thinking, another big word, and Paul probably knows, the old teleological explanations. The giraffe grew a long neck because it had to feed on the leaves higher in the trees, so that's what that is. But basically, in general, is that everything happens for a reason. So, nothing is random, and when you see A and B, not only, if you believe in all this, it's connected, okay? It's connected, there's a pattern, and there has to be a reason. Has to be a reason. So, a sampling of the thinking styles. Unfortunately, that can lead to narrowness of thought, narrowness of judgment and decision making. It can lead to willful ignorance at times. I'm sad to hear people say, I don't follow the news. My vote doesn't matter. All politicians are crooked. The generalizations, and putting your head in the sand are unhelpful as well, and cause people to lead to very incorrect conclusions. And voter apathy. So, these folks, while there's a spectrum, these folks have attributes and thought patterns that characterize them fairly well. And I'm not sure, I don't know if we'd want to go out and have a beer with them, but it is what it is. But anyway, nevertheless, they're real folks, and we need to have tools to deal with them.